right, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Sunday session with HGP, the Humanists of Greater Portland. My name is Anand Artre, and it is my privilege and pleasure to be your MC for today's event, which is being recorded for the general public. HGP believes strongly in the freedom of speech, but I must stress that the views expressed by myself, our reader, today's speaker, HGP members, and our guests at today's meeting are not the official views of the Humanists of Greater Portland. For those who are new to humanism or HGP, humanism represents a progressive way of thinking that is informed by science, inspired by art, and motivated by compassion. A humanistic approach to life is grounded in reason and our shared humanity, making a humanistic lifestyle align with social and planetary responsibility. Humanistic values are not based on appeals to external deities. Instead, they are formed when humans use reason and reflect with empathy on our experiences, collective needs, and capacity for flourishing. Paramount among these values is the commitment to uphold the dignity of all human beings. But for now, though, without further ado, let me turn the proceedings over to our reader for this week, Laurent Beauregard.
Yes, good morning. The reading this morning is adapted from an essay by Achim Reinhardt, and the title of the essay is Bob Dylan Won a Nobel Prize. So here goes. Bob Dylan received a Nobel Prize in Literature. The acceptance speech that he submitted was replete with misinterpretations of Moby Dick and was cribbed in part from Cliff Notes. Literary crimes and misdemeanors aside, the real issue is the literary merit of what Bob Dylan has written. When I think of great literature, I think of writing that offers insight into the human condition. I was 14 years old when I thought a Dylan song was profound. Blowing in the wind. Wow, that's deep. Did I mention that I was 14? At the time, I was also moved by paintings of large-breasted women with swords. My impression of Dylan soon wore off. Don't get me wrong. Dylan did write some great songs, but his lyrics are erratic. Their so-called literary artistry profits from musical accompaniments. I think that many of Dylan's words, when printed, are seen as pretentious and trite. Now, for example, consider his song with the quixotic title, Rainy Day Women. And here's the main lyric of that song. They stone you when you're trying to be so good. They stone you just like they said they would. They stone you when you're trying to go home. They stone you when you're there all alone. But I would not feel so all alone. Everybody must get stoned. I think it's safe to say that Bob Dylan does not compare with Leonard Cohen, who was still alive when Dylan got the prize. But if the Nobel Committee had felt that the time had come to expand the category of literature to include song lyrics, then they could have given the prize to Leonard Cohen. Cohen's lyrics are better than Dylan's. Here's an example. It's from Cohen's song, The Future. It starts this way. Give me back my broken night, my mirrored room, my secret life. It's lonely here. There's no one left to torture. Give me absolute control over every living soul and lie beside me, baby. That's an order. If you ask who is better, Bob Dylan or Leonard Cohen, then the answer, in my opinion, is far from blowing in the wind. That's it.
Thank you so much, Laurent. That was fantastic. And as you can tell from the reception at Friendly House, everybody appreciated it. It is now my pleasure to welcome our speaker for today's session. He's been the chair of Oregon's Coalition Against Hate Crimes since 2002 and is a globally recognized expert on bias crimes and extremism. He earned his PhD at Emory University in 1995 after completing an extensive field study of racist extremist hate groups that included undercover observations and interviews across the world. He became a tenured sociology professor at Portland State University and teaches sociology classes at the University of Oregon and Portland Community College. He serves as the vice chair of Oregon's Department of Justice Steering Committee on Bias Crimes and Incidents. He is currently also a subject matter expert on a federally funded grant called CurePNW, which develops community-based responses to violent extremism and adopts a public health approach to preventing political violence. He has previously delivered presentations to HGP on the new Nazis, unraveling the alt-right, white supremacists and COVID-19, and right-wing extremism after Trump. He joins us in person today to elaborate on why the increase in political violence and incivility is rooted in binarisms of us versus them, amplifies conspiracy theories and apocalyptic thinking. His presentation details how utilizing the ideas behind mindfulness can contribute towards healing political polarization, which is at the heart of CurePNW's ethos. In a time of deepening division in this country and across the world, his talk offers actionable insights on how mindfulness can bridge ideological gaps, fostering dialogue and reducing harmful polarization. Please join me in giving a big HGP welcome to Randall Blazak.
Hi, everybody. Woo. How you doing? Thank you. Thanks for that great introduction. I guess my presentation that was based on how to interrupt political violence with the lyrics of Bob Dylan is now scrapped. I have to start all over again. Sorry about that. Yeah. There is some wisdom there in the lyrics of Dylan that could guide us through this. But I'm really happy to be able to talk about this project that I'm working on. Usually when I'm kind of having these conversations, I'm doing a primer about extremism in Oregon and the history of right-wing extremism and how Oregon was created as a white-only state, and the history of sort of bad actors in Oregon, including racist skinheads and the order and groups like that. I'm not doing that today. I'm sort of focused on where we are and how we get out of it, and how we use this skill of mindfulness in this moment where it's actually more challenging than ever to be mindful, because we are kind of constantly reacting. There's just so much every day reacting, and there's this sort of metaphor of the trying to drink from a fire hose, right? We just have all this stuff being thrown at us and how to respond. So hopefully I'll leave here having shared some skills. The idea of this project, CurePNW, that I'm going to be talking a little bit about today, came out of 2020, the summer of 2020. And my students, it's just sort of, it kind of is just more and more challenging. My students, for the most part, all born in the 21st century. And so their historical memory is relatively short. If I want to say remember 9/11, many of them will say I wasn't even born on 9/11. But they do remember 2020. Many of them were in high school, or some of them may have even been in middle school when we all went on lockdown. And but they do have a memory of the just sort of craziness. I don't know a better word, but the craziness, because we had COVID, we had wildfires, which some people have forgotten about, having to leave the city because the smoke was so bad. But we also had over 100 days of sustained protest around the Black Lives Matter issue in our city. And our city was kind of in it, not the national, but the international limelight during those protests. I did interviews with BBC and Al Jazeera and Turkish television. Everybody wanted to know about why Portland was so up in arms. And it was really an opportunity for the nation to have a conversation about race and policing. And Portland just happened, for whatever reason. I mean, we've got a little bit of a history there. When I moved to Portland in 1995, they told me it was named Little Beirut for very good reasons. There was sort of a history of protest here. But it was an opportunity to have a real sort of conversation about race and policing, but that at times turned violent. There were 2 individuals involved in the protests who were killed on either side of the political spectrum. There was a lot of destruction Some would argue that the city is still recovering from those protests. And so when we had a change of administration, when the Biden administration came in, they wanted to kind of retool the Department of Homeland Security. You know, so for those of you that remember 9/11, remember the Homeland Security only goes back to the response to the terrorist attacks on 9/11. And so the Homeland Security has been used different ways under different administrations. So one of the things we saw in 2020 was Homeland Security, the Trump administration sent federal troops into the city. And once the federal troops showed up at the protest, the violence escalated. I mean, I was downtown for many of those nights. I got tear gassed. I had rubber bullets shot at me. I mean, it really felt like I was in Northern Ireland or in Lebanon or some other place other than the United States. But we know that those federal troops ratcheted up the reaction in the city. So when the Biden administration comes in, the goal is to sort of shift gears. A lot of it was like, well, Trump did it this way, we're going to do it this way. But all of a sudden, a lot of resources came online to find community-based ways to reduce political violence. And that was kind of the environment that this project that I'm going to talk about was created. Things have shifted back, deja vu all over again. And so we're seeing more ratcheting up, especially with ICE in town. And so I want to kind of try to set the stage, but also how our brains play a role in making it through this perilous time. So I'm going to I have a few slides I want to share with you, but my main goal is to have a conversation about this. So I do have some slides to sort of set the stage. So part of this is about the brain science behind how we're wired to fight. So I felt like when I was I was gonna like do a whole big presentation last night. I was working on it, but we're working on a new grant. So I actually put some of this together this morning. So I feel like when we're talking about reducing political violence, we have to establish a fact, which is we are now in a new political phase. We are in a political phase like we've never seen before. We are in an authoritarian takeover in this country. We're not trying to prevent it, it's here. The checks and balances that the founders set up to create a system based on making sure we stay on course with regards to our Constitution have gone out the window. The courts are gone. The Congress is gone. I mean, it's all under the control of one person and the people who handle him. So when we talk about this issue about political violence, one of the things I'm mindful of is there may be a time for political violence. And I hate to say that because I've been a peace worker all my life, but we are now approaching a time where some of that may be irrelevant, that there may be a time where we need people to be more aggressive. I have a fairly large social media presence. I feel very fortunate. I have about 120,000 followers on my Instagram, a little over 120,000 followers on my Instagram. And I've been pushing these ideas of mindfulness and how we do this peacefully. And there's been some pushback saying it's too late for that. It's too late. We are now, so I've been talking more recently about the notion of civil disobedience, how we can do civil disobedience, which sometimes involves illegal behavior. And I've been doing a little primer for my younger followers about a man named Abbie Hoffman, who some of you might know, steal this book. I had the great pleasure of seeing Abbie Hoffman speak in 1988 during the Democratic Convention in Atlanta. And he was still, very clear that sometimes we're going to have to break the rules when they're breaking the rules. So I just want to frame it in that setting, that the notion of political violence in the preservation of democracy is now kind of being entertained, that notion. And I'm not talking about assassinations or things like that. I'm talking about sort of monkey wrenching, people, slashing the tires of ICE vehicles as they're trying to get out of neighborhoods, things like that. But I do want that image of Trump is a little looming over us like, Big Brother is a little worrisome, but we are in a perilous moment. Okay. Yeah, so we are, and it's interesting when you go, as someone who's been writing about fascism and studying fascism, as an undergraduate at Emory University, I was a sociology major, and then just to make things more complicated, I added a political science major to it. And this was in the Reagan era, and we were worried about fascism then. And those of you that remember the Reagan era, he seems like a a fair weather liberal now compared to what's happening now. I mean, Reagan wanted amnesty for undocumented immigrants. I mean, he seems like he sent 300 metric tons of grain to Ethiopia after he heard Bob Geldof talk about the famine in Ethiopia. I mean, Reagan just seems so left wing now that if you would tell me, I would give anything to have Ronald Reagan instead of Donald Trump. My 20-year-old self would have knocked me silly. But when we go down the list of things that are the stalwart elements or the sort of pillars of an authoritarian state, they're all falling into line, and so that's why I framed this conversation about political violence in that setting. Okay, so there is a concept in sociology, just sort of set the stage, of anomie, and I think this is a really important concept to get out there because it explains sort of why we are where we are at this moment. So there was this founding sociologist in France named Émile Durkheim in the 1890s, and he wanted to do a study on suicide because suicide is seen as a very personal thing, and how could this be connected to larger patterns? And so Durkheim went around France and he went to the churches, which is where sort of the death records were kept, and to see, who was committing suicide, was there any information. He did this sort of pioneering research study. One of the things he found, for example, is that Catholics had lower suicide rates than Protestants. And one of the arguments was that Catholics have a lot of rules. There's a lot of ritual in Catholicism. I don't know if you've ever been to a Catholic wedding, but you're going to be there for a while. There's a lot of standing up and sitting down. It's like an aerobic workout. Versus a Protestant wedding where you're in, you're out, and you're done. And so the Catholic ritual, was interesting to him. What was that about? He also found that in the city, there was higher suicide rates than people who lived in the country. And if you think about living in the country, there's like grandma's dinner on Sunday, and everybody knows everybody's business, and people are more integrated. And he started looking at these variations. And what he was also looking at was that France in the late 1800s was going through massive change. There was a movement from the country to the city. We had this urbanization that was finally happening. We had a change in the economy. People were moving from farms to moving to factories, and so there's a big change there. And there's also the shift from monarchy to democracy. We were finally getting these democratic states. And so in a very short period of time, after a long period that we call the Dark Ages, there was this rapid change. And the rapid change created something that he called anomie. Anomie is the sense of normlessness. The opposite of anomie in French is bonhomie, or brotherhood, people kind of being together, but the sense of people being sort of left alone and not knowing what the rules are because of all this rapid change. And the rapid change throws people out of sorts and drives the suicide rate. But Catholics, for example, had all this ritual, and it kind of protected them from the anomie a little bit. So this notion of rapid change causing suicide was just kind of a little footnote that we had in sociology. When we talk about the history of social thinking and theorizing and doing research, we always got to talk about Durkheim and his study about suicide and anomie. And it's just sort of a little thing on an intro sociology textbook. We're talking about anomie a lot. Durkheim is back because we are now looking at the incredible rapid change that America has gone through in the last 50 or 60 years. I mean, I always use this image for my students about Father Knows Best, this TV show from the 1950s and early 60s. It was the most popular TV show in America as sort of a window of what America kind of looked like to people. And we think about the demographic changes that we've gone through since the Father Knows Best day, racially. I mean, there were no people of color on this show. There was no diversity. There may have been sort of maybe a Black porter or Asian guy working at a laundromat, but that was about it, right? And we've gone through an incredible amount of diversity, especially when the immigration law changed in the 1960s. The first real immigration law we had in this country was the immigration law of 1924 that limited immigration from non-white countries. It was sponsored by the Ku Klux Klan in 1924, and it was sort of the law of the land. When anybody says, my grandparents came here legally, before 1924, there was no legal. There was just, you just showed up because we were America and we wanted people. And then sort of this racist immigration law was set forth in 1924, and then that was changed in 1966, and the doors were sort of open. So we've had this incredible diversity that's changed, including racial and religious. I mean, where I grew up in a town called Stone Mountain, Georgia, which is the birthplace of the modern Ku Klux Klan. I always talk about it. It was about as white as you could get, and then all of a sudden it started to change. And my dad no longer lives there because he's one of these white flight guys. He's like, oh, we got to go to where there's people more like me, and he keeps moving. And I keep telling him, Dad, you're going to end up in the ocean. Like if you keep moving farther and farther away, America is changing incredibly dramatically around race and religion. I mean, he's got a mosque in his neighborhood. He's got a temple in his neighborhood. You know, all these things have sort of signified the change, and he keeps moving a little bit farther out, a little bit farther out, and he's only got so much farther to go. So race and ethnicity has been a big change in terms of gender. And this show, Mom, this is, by the way, in Springfield. I always love how these cities are always Springfield, where they're eating the dogs and the cats. The Mom, we don't know anything about Mom. We don't know her maiden name. We don't know her hopes and dreams. We don't know what she wanted to do other than get dinner on the table at 6 o'clock, right? The role of women in our society has changed incredibly. There are more women working in this economy than men. There are more women going to college than men. I mean, we've gone through this huge change around gender, around sexual orientation. There are no gay characters on the show that we know of. There maybe Bud grew up a little bit later. But, in my town in Stone Mountain, we knew there were gay people. They all lived in a place called San Francisco. There were certainly no gay people in Stone Mountain. So that's been a huge change. There were no trans people. And, so we've gone through these incredible changes that America doesn't look like this. We've also gone through some other parallel changes that are also important. The change in technology. I mean, the incredible computer power we all carry in our pockets now. Can you imagine Father Knows Best if they all had smartphones? It would just like, Dad, I'm just going to ask Siri. It would be a very different show. So that technology is changing and at lightning speed. And then another one that underlies all this is the change in the economy. That when this show was on TV, the number one employer in America was General Motors. Most people who were working in a factory setting. They belonged to a union. They had health care, they had a pension, and they could buy a house when they were 30 years old and start building wealth for them and their kids. All that's gone out the window. For years, the number one employer is Walmart. Now most people are self-employed. Most people are driving for Uber or having their own businesses or in some type of marginal economy. So this change has happened at lightning speed. And it's a perfect example of anomie, the sense of normlessness. And when you have this sense of normlessness, there's sort of two responses to it. One is excitement. Yay, I'm excited. Oh, there's so much diversity. It's great. And I love this new economy. There's new opportunities. It's great. And I love the fact that my gay nephew can hang out in rural Mississippi and be, hey, this is great. There can be that, or which might be more common, is the pushback. I don't like it. I don't like all this change. I don't like this. This is not what this was what America should be. This is what America looked like. Let's go back to that. So if a guy comes along and says, make America in 1955 again, there's going to be a bunch of people that listen. And I know this, as when you're getting older, you get a little nostalgic. Things are always better. The music was better. The friends were better. The bowling alleys were better. I mean, like all that kind of stuff starts to resonate. But the reality is the past was great and horrible because 1955 was also the peak of Jim Crow, was also, before the gay rights movement, the disability rights movement, the second wave feminist movement. And it was great for, Father. Everybody else was a little bit challenged. So I always think when people say like it was better in the past, I think about when I was growing up and what my TV looked like compared to my TV now. I have a wonderful Roku flat screen TV. The TV when I was a kid was me standing holding the rabbit ear so my dad could watch the golf game. That's what TV. I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if it was that great back then. I mean, like a little to the left, a little bit to the right. And then when I wanted to watch, where was my dad? Nowhere to be seen. I'm like, come on, Dad. I want to watch cartoons. Hold the antenna. So, the past is always great and not great. And the present is great and not great. But there is this hyper nostalgia that anomie breeds, that it was better back then. And so when someone comes along and talks about that, they get an audience. I get it, and it's totally understandable because when things are confusing, we want some clarity. And so part of this change has been those people whose status has been threatened. Right? It used to be a land for fathers, white cis straight fathers. Sort of the world was their oyster, and everybody else had to cater to them. So those threats to that status of all those categories can be unsettling. So I think Durkheim's study from way back when gives us a lot of insight about what we're going through right now, and it's understandable. It's a human emotion to want to respond to the confusion. And when Trump was running for president, first go around in early 2016, CNN asked him, "Well, you've got this slogan, 'Make America Great.' You're saying America's not great. When was it great?" And I think they were hoping he didn't say like 1860, because that would have been problematic on another level. But he said very clearly 1950. And he probably was talking about some trade policy in the context of that interview or something. But what a lot of people heard was "Make America white again. Make America father knows best again. Make America a place where I don't have to worry about pronouns, where I don't have to worry about sounding racist, where I don't have to worry about all these things." I always like to also point out, in 1950, we had the highest tax rate of the rich. We had the highest labor union membership. I mean, there's some things I would say, yeah, let's go back to that. Remember the unions? So this is kind of the setting we're in. And then there's sort of this landscape that we've got going on right now, where we've got incredible political polarity, right? This idea of bipartisanship has just gone out the window. The idea that you're either in the red team or the blue team, and there's no communication. We've seen the members of Congress that have tried that and then been bounced. Remember Liz Cheney? What happened? What happened to these people who were sort of old school politicians that could speak across the border? And so, in that setting, where there's a lot of screaming and yelling, and I have to say that some of this is facilitated by social media because it makes it so easy, and people in person can have civil conversations, but when they're on Facebook or on their social media, the gloves are off, and people can be incredibly vicious and hostile to each other. We're seeing more and more increased support for political violence. We've seen the surveys say we may need this more on both the right and the left, but especially on the right. And a lot of this, came to a head around the 2024 election, the conspiracy theories. I'm going to talk about conspiracy theories in a little bit. The conspiracy theories that the election was stolen, and that, if my guy loses, it's because of some, nefarious behavior. And so we're in this incredibly tense environment where we've seen political violence. We've seen, state legislators being assassinated in Minnesota. We've seen people being beaten up for their political beliefs. So we've seen more and more of this political violence where it's almost unrecognizable that we're still in the United States. Okay, so oops, there we go. Thank you. So some of the conditions that sort of set this up is we're in an environment where people don't trust each other, and they don't trust the government. They don't trust the main political parties, but they also don't trust sort of local city halls. They don't trust the local school boards. We're in this very low trust environment right now. There is this trend towards recrimination, meaning if your side did it, we need to get back at you. And so instead of us thinking of us as us, we're thinking about people on one side or the other. There's not a lot of conflict resolution skills. And this is kind of what this project tries to bring to the table about how do we get through this moment together. There's just lots of rewarding of fighting. There's this term trolling, like you're trolling people on the internet, like you're rewarded for going and being hostile to other people instead of finding common. And then other people don't have sort of other opportunities to express their political grievances. So it just comes out in a hostile kind of way. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the brain and this concept of the lizard brain. And we've been learning a lot about brain science over these years, but especially recently as related to trauma. There's a book that's been very popular, and I see it when I go to Powell's. It's always on like the bestseller list, called The Body Keeps Score. And it's about kind of what we learned from Vietnam vets and what we finally started kind of looking into the impact of war on veterans in a sort of more scientific way. we used to say, oh, they're shell shocked, they're coming back from the war, and there's just something wrong with them. My father went to high school in the 1950s, and he had a teacher who was a Korean war vet, and he used to tell the story. He doesn't do it this way anymore, but he told us the story, and he would just sort of laugh that when the students who knew that this teacher was a Korean war vet who had been sort of negatively affected by the war, when he would walk into the room, they'd make the sound of falling bombs just to see him quiver. Yeah, I know. That's the reaction now, right? Because now we know, thanks to the research at the VA in the 1970s on Vietnam vets, that there is a cognitive impact of war trauma on the brain, and that it changes the way that the brain works. And so thanks to the sacrifice and the experience of Vietnam veterans, we started being able to take that brain science and expand it out to think about other groups that may be experiencing trauma and what that does. And now I saw my father over spring break, and I mentioned to them, I said, yeah, I feel really bad that I told the story that way, because now we know. Now we know better. In 1980, we get the diagnosis of PTSD, and we start sort of the scientific understanding of trauma on the brain. So this is a little bit about the brain science that helps us to understand the polarity that we're in at the moment. Okay, so we have this very simple model of the brain, and there's this part of our brain called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the most primitive part of the brain. It's in all animals. All animals, lizards, birds, it's not in jellyfish, but in all sort of animals, have this thing called the amygdala. And it's basically the survival mechanism. We sometimes call it the lizard brain. It's the fight, flight, or freeze response. It's the thing that tells us, oh, we need to run to stay safe, or we need to fight, or we need to stay still and be camouflage. I've been watching this series on Netflix called Life on Earth about the evolution of life over the millions and millions and it talked about how, the big dinosaurs would like to eat the little dinosaurs, and the little dinosaurs learned that they just need to freeze. If there's a T-Rex around, just stay still, don't move, hope T-Rex doesn't see you. That's the lizard brain. Like, you're in survival mode. And we all have that in our brain. It's tiny. It's like the size of a lima bean in the middle of our brain. And it allows us to navigate dangerous moments. But fortunately, over, a few million years, our brains have sort of emerged around the amygdala. We've developed this very complex brain that we're still sorting out. But one of the things that makes us human is what's called the prefrontal cortex. It's the front of our brain. It's the thinking part of our brain. I think of it as like the part of our brain that makes us go, contemplate things and wonder about things. So if a lizard is on, a rock and it sees a shadow, immediately assumes the shadow is a bird that's going to eat it, and it's going to fight, flight, or freeze. It's going to either run away, try to be camouflage, or get ready to fight the bird. We're going to be like, oh, I wonder what that shadow is. That shadow could be it could be an airplane. It could be, we think about it. And so the prefrontal cortex, the contemplating part of our brain, sort of controls the lizard brain. So we're not always in fight, flight, or freeze. That would be very, hard to live if we were always sort of reacting. But the interesting thing is that the prefrontal cortex isn't fully formed until around age 25. So I would like us all to take a moment to think about when we were 16 years old. Did you do anything stupid? Did you do anything? Was there any impulse that you look at now and think, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that, right? That's because you were sort of working on your lizard brain, and your prefrontal cortex wasn't together yet. So, I have a lot of young students, and I'm like, you kind of have an excuse. Like, your brain is not really working. You're still kind of in the impulse mode. I was 16 in 1980, and my favorite TV show was called The Dukes of Hazzard. And I would ask my dad if I could borrow the car to go to the store, when in fact I was borrowing the car to go do donuts in a field somewhere, because I saw it on the TV show. And then, yeah, I would not do that now as a 61-year-old man. Maybe. We'll see. It's kind of fun at the moment. But yeah, I mean, our brains are just, we are just lizards when we're teenagers. We're just impulsive and responding. And, that part of our brain hasn't really settled in yet to be able to control that. But fortunately, as we get older, then all of a sudden, the lizard brain is kind of in check. But one of the things that we learned in doing this research is that trauma can interrupt that connection. that trauma puts us in fight, flight, or freeze mode. So this is the trauma of soldiers. You know, we just went through the 4th of July, and so there's a lot of awareness now about how veterans might be hearing the fireworks going off in the neighborhood. It puts them right back in Fallujah or Vietnam or whatever their experience is. The trauma of being a crime victim, especially a violent crime victim, you know, can put you in a state. The trauma of being a refugee, the trauma of being a prisoner, the trauma of being repeated recipient of bias and racism and sexism, things like that. I mean, we now know that these things can put people into a trauma state where the lizard brain is now in control. So I just wanted to set that up, that this is sort of the brain dynamic we're working. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's sort of the basic of it. And I mean, my daughter who's here will often say, if I'm, you know, getting angry at something, especially driving is a good trigger. She'll say, Dad, you're in your lizard brain. That's your lizard brain. I always hear you talking about the lizard brain. Chill out, Dad. Get that prefrontal cortex back up online. I'm like, okay. All right. So part of the mindfulness work that we do is sort of recognizing when we are in this lizard brain. So we're gonna come back to that, but it is very. I think road rage is the perfect example, because, you know, you can be driving and just be like peace and love, and then somebody cuts you off, especially if they have Washington license plates. That's the thing that does it for me. And I'm like, oh, let's fight. It's always, and it's never freeze. It's never flight. I get out of here. It's always fight if it's the Washington plates. Sorry, Washington people. Okay, so when we're coming at this from a sociological perspective, one of the things we always want to be mindful is that we're the products of our environment. Tabula rasa, this idea of blank slate. We are shaped by our environment. This, you know, my students are often shocked when I say human beings don't have instincts. We are born without instincts. And I always use the example of sea turtles. I used to do some work in Mexico on this great island, Isla Mujeres, where the sea turtles come up, mama sea turtle lays the eggs, buries the eggs, and then goes away. She never has any relationship with her kids ever. And then a couple of days later, you're like within a month, these little eggs hatch and they know immediately what to do. They go straight for the ocean because they know that there's seagulls flying over. And if they just sort of hang out and be like, hey, we're sea turtles on this beautiful beach, let's just hang, they're going to get gobbled up. So they know automatically. There's no like meeting below the sand to say, all right, you flank left, you flank right, and I'm going to go right down the middle. And, you know, one of us will get to the ocean. They just know. It's hardwired into their brain. It's their instinct. The argument is that human beings are, and this is sort of as mammals progress, we have really big brains. So we can't learn all that stuff in utero. We got to get born early. I mean, for a human to have the same instincts that the sea turtles have, we'd have to give birth to like me, have to give birth to 7-year-olds, you know, basically. But since those brains are so big, all that stuff that gets hardwired as instincts for other animals comes after we're born. We have to learn all those survival techniques after we're born. So therefore, where we are in the world, are we born in a desert or a jungle, a city or a rural area, a Catholic country or Muslim country, is going to be a factor. And also when we're born. You know, the world that my daughter is growing up in, she's never not known a smart screen. She's been on a smartphone. I mean, this may be bad parenting, but she's been able to like navigate a phone since she was about 1.5. So there's incredible variation on what we're learning. And so time and place are huge variables. And we're more complex than sea turtles. That's both good and bad in this sense. So in that socialization, we go through what we call these socialization agents, the people who teach us how to be in the world. We start with a family, right? The family teaches us you know, how to talk, mama and dada, how to eat, what to eat, how not to hit your sister, you know, all those sort of little things. And then we send kids off to the school in locus parentis, where we learn the 3 R's, only one of which starts with R, which I always think is a fatal flaw in the education system: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And it's like, that's the 3 R's. But we learned kind of about the bigger world. And then we go into our faith traditions. Many of us do anyway, maybe not everybody in this room, but some of us do, where we learn kind of about life after death and some of the larger issues that we're told about. We hit adolescence and our peers start becoming a big influence. You know, we learn about what's cool, right? We don't learn that from mom and dad. We learn, I mean, I have a Gen Alpha child, and the language that she uses, I don't know what she's saying, and I thought I was super cool. And I don't know what a skibbity toilet is, but apparently it's, you know, like all the slang of the, I don't know. It's a mystery to me. We could call her in and she could tell us. But you know, there's the peer culture, and then of course the media, especially in our society, is a huge influencer. And all this is sort of being placed into our brain, some of it overtly, like where, you know, the teacher is saying, hey, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue and discovered America. But some of it is subtle, like, oh, Columbus, this white guy discovered this thing that didn't matter until he discovered it. Like, I'm learning kind of concepts of white supremacy in that story on a subtle way. I'm getting the overt message and I'm getting the subtle message. And a lot of this is happening very early. So if you're a fan of Dr. Freud, he argues that our personalities are basically shaped by around age 6. Like, enough of this is seeped into our brain. And this is what's shaping our lizard brain, the stuff that we're getting very early. Okay. So one of the things we're learning, this is where all this kind of ties in, is we're learning this idea of the binary. We're learning things are black and white. Things are sort of one side or the other side. And this, the way that we learn language is very binary. We learn up and then we learn down. We learn right and we learn left. We learn good and we learn bad, right? There are sort of two ways of being. You're either on this side or this side. There's like people, you know, I always think there's two. I always love it when people say there's two types of people in the world. You know, that's a very binary notion. Like people who like cilantro and then weird people. Like, I don't understand the people that don't like cilantro, but everything has an opposite. And so we do this, and you know, one of the conversations we've been having over the last 20 years is how we do this with gender. You know, that gender is a binary. And this has been very problematic for a lot of people because we've often confused biological sex with sociological gender, and gender varies very much. I mean, gender has changed over time. I mean, there are more women working in this economy than men. 100 years ago, it was illegal for women to wear pants in the city of Portland, Oregon, or patent leather shoes also. And you know why that was? They're very shiny. They're shiny shoes. And it's funny how that punishes the women and not the creepy men that are going around looking for patent leather shoes. But there you go. But also with regards to politics, we've really fallen into this binary about politics, about red states and blue states and conservative and liberal. And one of the things that we know from the surveys that we take is that not only is gender fluid, like people, sometimes you're feeling very macho, sometimes you're feeling more feminine, is that political perspectives are very fluid. The way people feel about politics, the way people change over the course of their lifetime, or the way they change over the course of an election season. I did an interesting thing for one of my classes one time where I gave them sort of a very general survey about attitudes and if they saw themselves as conservative or liberal. And then I showed a documentary about racism in the criminal justice system, and I gave the exact same survey. And 2 hours later, a bunch of people switched. You know, they went from being very conservative, oh, this documentary changed, now I think I'm more liberal. So we know that we're very fluid around this. And so it's all shades of gray. It's not black and white, but we're socialized. It's the binary, you know, threat, safety. That's sort of what we get from the lizard brain. So we're in this sort of moment where we're very polarized, and we've got this strange dichotomy between conservatives and liberals, or now I guess now the new framing is the binaries between MAGA and communists. Either you're MAGA or you're communist. That's sort of the way the language has gone, which, as someone who spent years and years and years studying Marx, it's not communism. Hillary Clinton is not a communist. I can pretty much guarantee it. But so then we think about in this environment, what are the triggers? What are the things that set us off politically? Some of this can be in social media, right? Somebody posts something and you're like, I need to respond, and your lizard brain is firing. Some of it is in interactions with people when we're trying to have a reasoned debate and somebody says something that seems racist or just really problematic, and we're just set off. We're just, all of a sudden we're in fight, flight, or freeze mode. When we start to recognize that our political positions are more fluid, it's kind of easier to start navigating that. And then we are also talking to people about what our core values are. That our core values tend to be more stable, less fluid, and often our core values are not that different from the people that we're arguing with. But we're in a moment where we're easily triggered, where our lizard brain can be set off. And I know I've had these. I know you have to pick your battles, and there are times when I want to be conciliatory or de-escalating, but there are times where I just want to fight. I've said you're an idiot in times when I probably should have said, well, what makes you think that? How did you come to that? And I just like, no, you're an idiot. You're a complete idiot. I'm not. Nope. I'm deleting you from reality. So it's very easy in this environment to be triggered. Okay, so this work that we're doing comes from actually sort of the public health field around knowing the spread of disease. And what we know about the spread of disease, having survived COVID and all the other epidemics, is that things start small and they spread out wide. When we look at the spread of violence, and this is just violence in general, it often follows the same epidemiological process of starting off small and ending big. So for example, gang violence. Gang violence is very, very much follows a public health model. And these are sort of examples of diseases and gang violence, how they start in small clusters and then spread out. So, one gang member has a beef with another gang member. He says something bad about his mama, and then, they have got to fight. And all of a sudden, these two gangs are at war, and those gangs spread to other gangs. And all of a sudden, we've got a city that's plagued with gang violence. But that violence spreads in much a similar way that disease spreads. And so we're looking at this as an approach to reduce political violence. So if those folks remember 2020, when things started to get really, tipping into the world of violence, is when people from outside of the city started coming in. There were cavalcades of people coming from Clackamas County. They would rally at the Clackamas Town Center, and they would come in like, kind of like an illness, and all of a sudden the violence would escalate. And then even when they left, the violence would continue. So it was kind of like a contagion coming in, spreading the violence. So that's kind of the model that we're working at. So we're working on this sort of response. I'm trying to get towards the part where we're going to discuss this, where we can have an understanding of this contagion effect of violence. We can understand the binary and how our lizard brain sort of puts us in the fight, flight, or freeze mode and respond to it. So we've got these sort of skills we're working on through this project called CurePNW. One is this idea of credible messengers. Okay, so what is a credible messenger? A credible messenger is someone who's in a community who can help that community sort of move away from violence. So for example, we've got people in, okay, I don't want to name too many things, but there's a little town across the river called Vancouver. Maybe you know about it. Vancouver has had sort of a history. I mean, Vancouver's gone through incredible changes because a lot of people can't live in Portland anymore because it's too expensive. So they're infecting Vancouver with their hipster ways and their coffee shops and their cafes. And I went over to Vancouver last week and I'm like, this is Portland 1995. I mean, it's like what Portland used to look, because we used to call it Vantucky. And I'm like, no, somebody called it Vansterdam. Because it's now, it's been sort of infected by the cool people. But there has been sort of an issue of sort of very right-wing actors, groups like the Proud Boys, that are headquartered in Vancouver and coming over here. And there's a church in Vancouver that is very right-wing and has a pastor who says that gay people should be put to death. That's part of his ministry. Yeah, I know. Very. What did Jesus say about that again? But when we have a credible messenger, we can have somebody who's in that church who has a counter view, who can present it in a safe space. Because if I come in, or a politician comes in, or a cop comes in and says, you shouldn't do that, Jesus loved everybody, I'm on the outside, they're just going to turn me off. But if I'm on the inside already, I'm like, well, okay, I hear where you're coming from. Here's another thing. They're on the inside, they can turn them a little bit. And where this model comes from of credible messengers is gang de-escalation. When you have gangs, this has worked very well in Chicago, where you have two gangs that are sort of rival gangs, and things start getting towards violence. An older gang member, not a cop, not a social worker, but an older, like former gang member who was in the gang 20 years ago, say, hey, young fellow, why don't we take a walk around the block? Let's talk before you guys go off and start shooting each other. Let's take a walk and let's talk about where this goes. Listen to me, I was there, I went through it, I lost a lot of friends, and that credible messenger can de-escalate that gang member from violence. So in these settings where there's intense political incivility, credible messengers can be used. And we're currently doing this on a project with regards to the activist community. On the other side of the political spectrum, there are members of the activist community in Portland who want violence. They want the same thing that the guys on the right want. They want to crash society, and so they can create this utopia out of it. In the meantime, a whole bunch of people are going to get hurt. So we've got credible messengers in the activist community can say, yeah, I get where you're coming from. I mean, I was 20 years old once also. I tried to get arrested. There's a picture of me like lying at the feet of a cop saying, please arrest me. I was protesting whatever Ronald Reagan was doing that week. I can't remember, Contras or something. And I was 20 years old. I was firing on my lizard brain and I wanted to smash. And so some of the older activists are like, okay, well, I know where you're coming from. I was there. Let's just sort of take it down a notch and take a walk around the block. So credible messengers are a great way of sort of de-escalating the violence. And it could be, just in sort of communities where people are becoming really agitated. So I guess this isn't surprising because it's been happening for a long time in the South, but you want to see some fireworks, go to a school board meeting. School board meetings are on fire because either people want to ban books or they want certain books, they just can go off the rails very quickly. So to have people that are sort of credible to those activists in those communities, whether they're on the right or the left, be able to say, okay, all right, we can find another way of doing this, that we can also get the work of the school board done without all the screaming and yelling. The other part of this is community capacity, building trust within communities. Again, we have a lot more in common than we have different. So if we can kind of bring people together to talk about that commonality, and this project has brought people together in churches and activist groups. We're currently working on a project with Portland Police. We just got a grant to do a project with the Portland Police so they can build the community capacity with the activist community, and they can start building trust with each other because we're all part of the same city. And, cops are union members and they're members of, the same experience that the activists in Portland are going through. So we start kind of bringing them together to have these discussions of commonality and build that internal resistance because it's very binary. There was in 2020, there was some graffiti that you probably saw across the city that said ACAB, all cops are bastards, right? That was spray painted all over the city. Someone in my neighborhood spray painted F the police or something like that. And I went over it, and I don't think I would have gotten arrested for doing this, but maybe I just wrote hug the police over it. And then they came back and they wrote kill the police over it. I'm like, okay, now we need to have a conversation because this is a very binary, and I get it. There's real history of real problems with the police in this city, especially around minority communities, including people being killed. But let's start building community capacity to be able to have that conversation and break the binary. Part of this is coalitions, bringing people together from different groups to be able to have these conversations, to form, cross-political conversations. We did some work up in Washington, up in Longview, Washington, very working class and very conservative place. With a local church that was very conservative and a church that was more progressive. Let's get together and have some of these conversations. Helping people teach de-escalation skills. And this is where we get to the mindfulness. And I want to wind this down because I do want to have a conversation about mindfulness, is how we recognize this in ourselves. How do we stop in that moment when our lizard brain is firing? I mean, there is a real skill because when the lizard brain fires, we're on automatic pilot. when I was at Portland State, I would often take my lunch at the Multnomah County Courthouse. I would just take my lunch down and sit in the court chambers just to witness what was going on. It was better than Perry Mason because it was in 3D. And I would just sit there. And a lot of the cases were domestic violence cases. And the men all said the same thing. I don't know what happened to me. That's not me. I'm not a violent person. I respect women. Something happened and I became violent in that moment. Yeah, what happened was your lizard brain kicked in because of something. You were drunk or angry or high or, regressing to your teenage brain. And now that you're out of it, you're full of regret. So how do we get people to interrupt that step? How do we get people to have a recognition that, oh, my lizard brain is firing. I'm in fight, flight, or freeze mode. Maybe I need to take a break. So, we do things like teaching meditation, breathing skills. There's a really great, one of the things I learned, and this is all new to me because I'm a sociologist. It's supposed to be society. And now I'm talking about brains and breathing, is that you can slow your heart rate down. That when you, and I never knew this, that when you inhale, your heart rate goes up, and when you exhale, your heart rate goes down. So you can do a little trick. It has some cool Sanskrit name that I can never remember, but the idea is that you can do this breathing exercise. It's called 5-7-8. That you inhale for 5 beats, hold for 7, and then exhale for 8. So your exhale is just a little bit longer than your inhale. And if you do that a couple of times, you can totally feel yourself calming down. And I've been driving, and my daughter Cosie's like, Dad, you're in your lizard brain. I'm like, hold on a second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, I'm not going to kill anybody. It worked. But, when we sort of develop those skills, and the idea of mindfulness, which is a very complex concept that's rooted in a very simple complex, which is we can monitor our internal state. We can start kind of seeing our brain. We can start seeing our brain working. We can see the little gerbil on the wheel running around, and we can kind of get in front of that. And by teaching these de-escalation skills, including with young people who are totally lizard brain, right? You're in your lizard brain, you're always sort of impulsive. To be able to sort of slow yourself down, we can interrupt that impulse to violence and hostility. Okay, and then the last part of this is when we're doing this work, one of the things that's been very helpful is kind of recognizing the common values we have across political spectrums. That all of a sudden, this language that we use, libtard, you're a Nazi, all this sort of polarizing language. When we start talking about common values, we start sort of breaking through and having conversations about the things that we actually share. We care about fairness. We're framing it differently, but we have this core thing that connects us. We care about education. I mean, a lot of this stuff is very contested these days, but when we're talking to people on the streets and not Stephen Miller and the administration, it turns out that, people who are red people and blue people have a lot of these common values. And there was a brilliant experiment that was done about 15 years ago at Gonzaga University. And they did this great thing on political civility that's been very helpful here, which is they surveyed people to find people who had different attitudes. And then they brought these people together. And let's say abortion. Abortion is one that, there's these people and these people, never the twain shall meet. They're very, very sort of locked into their position. And they brought the people into, sort of a laboratory, but it was just like a room like this. We want you to have a conversation. You're pro-choice, you're pro-life. Okay, have a nice day. We're going to leave. You guys have a conversation. And of course, they were like, blah, 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 blah. They were just fighting. Then they brought those same people together, not the exact same people, but people that were pro-choice and pro-life, and saying, hey, what we would like you to do is talk about something you have in common. Talk about values, talk about your kids, talk about, I'm sure they talked about basketball at Gonzaga, talk about something that you have in common. And then they would give them sort of 10 minutes just chit chat about these things like, oh, my kid's going to high school, my kid's going to college. You just have these sort of conversations. And then they ask them to have the conversation about abortion. And once they first had a conversation about what they had in common, when they got to the thing that made them different, the conversation was completely different. It was much more respectful. There was much more listening. There was much more curiosity. Did you know anybody that went, oh, well, that must have been really, all of a sudden it was a very human conversation. And all it took was just sort of moving the order of things from let's, debate to let's talk about what we have in common. Okay, now let's talk about what makes us different. And it was very different. So when we get to have these conversations about values, all of a sudden it opens up the door for people to have much more calm conversations about what they have in common. All right. So this is the idea. I thought this is my sort of last thought on this, is that we want to be able to respond to these conflicts in real time without escalating the violence, while also recognizing the threat that's at hand. And one of the arguments that I've been making on social media and the work that I've been doing is that we can't do this without, quote unquote, the other side. That we need to bring on board Trump voters. We need to bring on board Reagan Republicans. We need to bring on board people who didn't vote, or people who are, diametrically opposed on Gaza, or trans people in sports, or whatever it is. We need to be able to break through these binaries that divide us and bring people on board, or else we're not going to be able to have this debate ever again. We're going to be, permanently locked into an authoritarian state. So that is the goal of this work, is to be able to connect to people. And I'll just say this in closing, and then I'd love to open it up for questions, is that it's incredibly rewarding. I mean, there are people who I have locked out of my life because of their political views that now I'm more curious with, I'm more interested in their position, and things have started to open up, and I've made some new friends. I never thought I would be like having beer with a Trumpy. But all of a sudden, we've got some things to talk about because we care about Ukraine, or we care about kids getting good education. All of a sudden, we're finding common ground and breaking through that binary. And I think that's where the hope is. Okay, thanks very much for that. I'd love to see what you think.
Thank you so much, Randall. I was particularly drawn to the interdisciplinary aspect that you brought to things, which is really, really helpful and extremely thought-provoking. But I'm going to stop rambling because it's now time for the Q&A.
Yeah.
So for those of you who are at Friendly House, if you have a question for Randall, please raise your hand to get a number, and you can ask your question when called upon. And there's going to be a lot, I know. So if you're on Zoom and you have a question, please type your name into the chat. I will monitor it. And when I call your name, you can unmute your microphone and ask your question. We're already seeing a lot of hands go up. So since there will be many questions for Randall, please keep that in mind when it's your turn, so we can try to cycle through as many questions as possible before we run out of time. Shall we go to the first question at Friendly House? Go ahead.
The very commonly used term us versus them, my term for that is tribalism. And I think, I don't have scientific proof of it, that is built into the genetics of our species. So I'm wondering if you are aware of any research on that. What's the genetic basis for that? And there may be someone here who wants to comment about that, our genetics expert.
Okay, well, I'm going to speak as a sociologist. We are the products of our environment. So tribes are socially constructed. You could belong to 10 different tribes depending on how you want to categorize yourself. I do share with my students, if human beings have been around for roughly 200,000 years, and we've only been civilized for about 8,000 of those 2,000 years, we do carry a lot of those hunting and gathering elements of culture with us. So that's still the majority of our human existence. It's been as hunters and gatherers, but those categories are created. I mean, we have done experiments on, assigning people to tribes and watching the conflicts emerge, like the Stanford prison experiment was the most famous one. And then we can, move people to another tribe, and now they're loyal to this tribe. So I think it's a little mental trick that we do about sort of the notion of tribal loyalties, because these categories are human construct. The idea of race did not exist until the 1600s. I mean, it's a modern invention. So I am challenged by the notion of tribal identity, although I know we do carry some of this in our human history.
Okay, let's go to question number 2 at Friendly House.
Hi. It's a great presentation.
Thank you.
The idea of protest, I'm concerned about that. I've been a proponent of the going to the protests this time. I'm now concerned that I feel like I'm doing it just for me. I'm being happy about that. But it's not, I don't think it's doing anything. And I'm wondering, is there something else? I'm thinking a general strike or something along those lines, rather than just going and seeing everybody and saying, hi, here we are to protest. Let's all get together.
Your sign is great. My sign.
Yeah, my sign's great. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that is the question of the moment. Let me tell you, on social media, this is a wide debate, and so there's two sides to it. One is the protests are really important because they bring other people out. If more people had protested in Germany in 1933, things might have been different, but people were afraid. So it especially gives permission to people in places where they are afraid. It's one thing to protest in Portland, Oregon. It's another thing to protest in Biloxi, Mississippi. So, it gives permission and encouragement to those people. There is sort of some scholarship about the 3.5% number, that if you can have 3.5% of the population protesting over a sustained period, the history has shown that those movements, whether it's the Philippines or Czechoslovakia, have actually changed things. The other side of it is, you're right. And I just did a video about this, that it's great. I went to a No Kings protest the other day, and I felt it was great. People were waving at cars and saying Trump sucks and democracy matters and all that good. Everybody felt good, pat themselves on the back, but it's not going to move the ball. So the next level is, something that really makes the powerful feel uncomfortable. So strikes, which is hard to do. We're not France, right? Where France can do like, hey, let's go on strike tomorrow. All right, I wasn't going to work anyway. So all of a sudden they're on a national strike. But so it's a little bit harder in a nation of 330 million people. Boycotts, but civil disobedience in ways that sort of make I can't predict, and I can't say that my Instagram video is going to inspire somebody. But I would like to see somebody approach Mr. Trump on a golf course, and not with a gun, but with, just to make his little golf game a little bit more. The idea is that you're, challenging these people where they are. So there is going to be an escalation, because we're no longer just like, please don't do this. It's already happened. It's happened. The democracy is on the vine. Is that the right way of saying it? We're sort of like on life support. That's the metaphor. So yeah, we're going to see an escalation, but the protests are important because the protests bring people out who wouldn't normally come out. I mean, let's be honest. A lot of people who protested in the 60s did it because it was cool. You go to meet chicks. I mean, there's an anti-war rally. Let's go. Maybe meet somebody and get high. I mean, some of that was social. And that's okay, because it created numbers in the streets that created the perception in middle America, oh my gosh, something's happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. But all of a sudden there became this social movement norm. And so we're trying to normalize resistance. And we want people to be like, oh yeah, every time we go out and now there's people protesting in front of the Tesla dealership or at the grocery store. I mean, that needs to be seen. Otherwise, complicit silence is the rule of the day. Yeah. So thank you for that, because it is important and it inspires other. And one of the things I've been saying also is, and I go to a lot of protests and I notice everybody's kind of my age and older for the most part. Like, where are the young people? So there's also a conversation about how to engage young people. This is the book that I'm writing right now. How do we get the millennials? I mean, 45% of millennials did not vote in the last election. It just blows my mind. Like, this is the world you're inheriting, and you're just like, I can't decide. I'm not going to vote. Like, we really have to engage young people. But the stories of the older generations about how that actually worked can be really helpful. So I appreciate the people who are veteran protesters. That voice is really important.
Okay, let's go to question number 3.
The value exercise that you did to bring people to common ground, wouldn't that in the large sense be build rapport before you start to solve a problem?
Yeah, that's just it. That's just, I mean, we are so separated. There are family members who are talking to family members. I mean, it feels like brother versus brother in the Civil War, a few centuries ago. So we're really trying to, that's the perfect word. We're really trying to build rapport with each other. My father, who I've mentioned, we're kind of on opposite sides of the political spectrum. But then we started having conversations about what's really important in terms of what we care about for the country. And in 2022, I went to Ukraine at the beginning of the war to do humanitarian work in the war zone. And he's broken from his party by saying, yeah, I saw that you went, I saw how those people are suffering. I respect you as a person, except for what you did with my car when you were 16 years old. But we can build a rapport around that issue, and all of a sudden we have this common ground that we can talk about. So yeah, building that rapport but it takes work, right? It takes work, and it takes a little bit of risk, because I'm gonna have to be in an uncomfortable situation talking to somebody that's gonna drive me crazy and put me in my lizard brain. So I have to have a lot of patience and be curious. Instead of saying you're wrong, the response is, well, why do you think that? What brought you to that? Yeah.
So we also have to know.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, we have to be open. Like, we're all works in progress, and so my evolution on so many things has changed. I mean, where I find a great example of hope is in we love attitude surveys. Sociologists love to ask people what they think about things. What do you think about the president? What do you think about the price of tea in China? And we've never seen a bigger attitude shift in a shorter period of time. About 10 years ago, around one specific issue, and that's same-sex marriage. That in 2005, the majority of Americans were against gay marriage, including the president of the United States, a guy named Barack Obama. 10 years later, the majority of Americans were for same-sex marriage rights. Like, it changed, in a blink of an eye in terms of attitude surveys. We've never seen a shift change so quickly, including, by the way, Barack Obama. He changed his opinion too, came out in favor of it. What happened in that 10 years? People built rapport with people in their communities who were LGBTQ, including family members. It wasn't somebody in San Francisco, it was my neighbor or my nephew. And all of a sudden, well, I have this right, shouldn't they? I mean, I've always been for gay marriage, because I think that means you can also have gay divorce. And I think gay people should experience that as well. I mean, if we want to be equitable, they should get the whole ball of wax. So yeah, I mean, what happened? I mean, that's exactly what happened. Is a lot of people admitted that they were wrong. Like, oh yeah, okay, I'm gonna have to revisit this now that I have, a gay nephew or so on. So yeah, I mean, I think that's part of that conversation, being vulnerable.
Let's go to question 4, Friendly House.
On that, my question gets too involved in go on to number 5.
Okay, thanks, Joyce. We'll go to question 5 then.
Well, now I'm intrigued.
We can come back to you, Joyce, later on if we've got time. Okay.
The Humanists of Greater Portland had a group called Building Trust, and we tried to bring people together. I'm just curious, how are you getting the reds and the blues or the together? We tried for 3 years, 6 years. And
the short answer is food. Like, food often brings people. I mean, part of it is this, and I don't mean to oversimplify it, but that everybody is frustrated with the division, that everybody is frustrated with family members and Thanksgiving, and everybody is frustrated with this idea that you have to be on one team or the other. There's this incredible like weariness, I think, of people after so many years of this. So we really kind of played to that idea, like, are you tired of the fight? We're going to offer a path through it. And so there are going to be some people who are like, oh no, I love the fight. The fight is my jam. I only want to fight. But there are enough people that are just weary from all this fight that are willing to kind of come and imagine a different way. Yeah. Right.
All right. Question number 6 from the house.
When you talk about solving these irreconcilable problems, there's one exception in the world that seems to stand out, and that would be Ireland seems to think they solved the abortion problem, and maybe a few others besides. Is what they're doing transferable to the United States? Do you think that we should be doing that?
Well, just think about that. 600, really 800 years of conflict, has been relatively, there's still tensions in the North. And I spent a lot of time my senior's honors thesis was in Northern Ireland. And so I know that conflict very well. And they, you know, they did what was called truth and reconciliation, that we need to be honest and admit where we were wrong. We need to kind of be able to bring people together and say, that was then, this is now, or do we want to continue living in a place where you don't know if that car is going to blow up or not? And so, you know, they brought people together to have really hard conversations, and in the mindfulness spirit kind of let go of what their lizard brain was telling them, because their lizard brain was like, we've been fighting for 600 years, we're going to continue fighting. Okay, let's think about where that goes. And so they did the same in South Africa. They did it in Rwanda, where they had a genocide that sort of exploded over a weekend, essentially. So there is the ability to bring people together, and through these practices, be able to check in with what the impulse is. And the impulse, you know, sometimes impulse is good. Like sometimes I need to fight, flight, or freeze. But often impulse, you know, just creates generations of more trauma. So yeah, those truth and reconciliation approaches are rooted in this practice. It'd be hard here because the way media and social media and Fox News versus MSN, you know, I mean, we are just really building in the fight because there's a bunch of people to make money from it. You know, there's a bunch of profit that's made from all this fighting.
Okay, question 7 at Friendly House.
Well, this is a difficult question towards, but I think it's something about balance, and where you would suggest we wisely find the balance in promoting unity and calling, which I think is a very soft action for
colleagues.
Calling for collaboration and cooperation, versus standing one's ground and deciding, okay, this is something I need to stand firm on. I'm thinking a lot about social change and social competition, and how, while one group like modern progressives might be meeting and talking about mindfulness, modern conservatives might be meeting and forming militias and talking about how they win the Civil War. Yeah. And so where do we draw the balance?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And that's why I sort of started with the picture, like, honest, we're in an authoritarian state right now, and there may be a time when, you know, those calls for violence, you know, make sense, that we're 1861 all over again. So it's a really tough question. And what we're trying to do in this work is prevent us from getting to that tipping point. You know, if we can bring enough people over, not just to our way of looking at the world, my position on abortion or my position on immigration, but enough people to kind of back on board to value those democratic values that we hold, that we can kind of prevent this thing from falling off the edge. Because when it falls off the edge, you know, I mean, it may be Johnny, get your gun. I mean, it may be a completely different situation. So we're hopeful in that in this moment we can bring enough people over that we can have elections next year. I mean, there's a real concern that we won't have elections in 2026. You know, there's all kinds of things being done to make that less likely. So we're working fast and furious now to kind of prevent that from happening. But you're right, it's a real tough question, because there may be a point, and I don't want to diffuse my position on immigration, for example, because I want my dad to like me, who has a completely different view on immigration and votes accordingly. So it's a real balancing act. But I think we're modeling humility and humanism, both of those values, first and foremost, to try to bring us back to the center.
Okay, question in the house.
Yeah, you touched on the opportunistic factor in a lot of this conflict, and I'm thinking specifically the billionaires who are profiteering from Trump's administration, or just, you know, sowing conflict in general. And I keep thinking that we should just tell the United States government, you know, we'll leave the United States government as it is, but we're going to go after the people who are actually working for it. Just take it straight, you know, go over their heads, go to the people who are funding their campaigns.
Yeah, you know, the Citizens United decision from the Supreme Court that said that campaign donations are free speech really changed the ballgame completely. Again, there's hope in the democratic experiment that through the courts and through elections that we can rein in those people. I mean, there are some pretty powerful people that are pulling the strings. And that's the way to go. There are people, and I've talked to these people, say, no, we're just going to kill them. We're just going to assassinate them, and that'll save America. And so I get it. I get it, because it feels very desperate at the moment, but we're still sort of pushing this sort of peaceful revolution approach at the ballot box. And it may be naive, but you only need 50+1, right? You just need to get that simple majority. And there were so many people that didn't vote last time, especially young people, that if, despite all the shenanigans, if we can get them on board, 2026 may be our last chance.
Okay, question 9.
Guess I'm just
Number 9.
Am I the last one?
No.
Oh, yeah. My name is Dawn,
Hi,
and
Don.
I wanted to thank you so much for bringing forth such practical ways to implement this. And I thought to myself when I was perusing the newspaper, I am new to this area. You can probably tell by my accent. People still make fun of. I don't know what's talking. Anywho, so I was perusing not the newspaper, but online, and I found this group, which I'm very thankful of, because what is relevant to me is I'm a retired physician, and my late husband was a retired engineer. And we formed a foundation. I'll be brief before I get to we formed a foundation called the Eagle Vision Foundation to promote and bring peace and joy through oneness of humanity with the one God, worshiping in oneness of love. So to address why has there been so much bloodshed, death, damage, and destruction, misusing the name of God. And the beauty of an organization like this is I feel very welcome here, because it is the believers primarily that have done the death, damage, destruction, and bloodshed in the name of God and religion, and resorted to lizard brain. Now I have a new word. Thank you for that. So what is it that we want? Everybody wants the same thing. We want peace, and we want to be happy. So what is it that can be done? What is it that gets in the way of that? What is it that gets in the way of bringing people together? Because if you were, for example, from Zimbabwe, you would say, I am because you are, Ubuntu. If you were a physicist, you would say, we are quantum infinite. There is only oneness of humanity. And it's hard to get red and blue people together. I can tell you, it's hard to get a Jew in the same room with a Muslim, in the same room with a Christian, in the same room with a Hindu, and talk about God and religion. But we have done it, and I wanted to tell you about that and to ask you a question. Okay. So in the early 2000s, we put together our foundation and had what we call oneness home meetings, small group sessions, and public peace forums. They were primarily of interest in overseas. We went to India, Cambodia, Nigeria, Vietnam, places like that, and some in the U.S. And we had we put in some of the same principles that you're talking about that are excellent, and that is learn the positives about one another's religion. So the meetings last about an hour.
Go on, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we are running out of time. So could you get to the question, please? Thank you.
So there's more practical points in his book. He wrote a book called Voice and Wisdom before he passed away. And it's available on Amazon. My question is, what advice, given your very analytic, excellent method, would you give to someone like myself who wants to promote this to prevent the bloodshed misusing the name of God?
Yeah, thank you for that. And thanks for your work. Obviously, it's a huge issue. I'm like, okay, I need to create a major at a local university to address this question. When we stay with the public health approach, if the notion of violence is a contagion and then spreads, there's also a public health approach to the notion that we're the antibodies to that. And that when we are in meetings like this, and meetings with our family members, and meeting in our communities, the more that we talk about it, we sort of spread this idea of de-escalation and finding common values. And we start to normalize that. There's this, I grew up in the South, so there's this thing about not talking about religion or politics. We can talk about the weather, we can talk about sports, we can talk about that dog that got off its leash, but we can't talk about religion and politics. That's like the third rail. That's created this conspiracy of silence around these things that now divide us. So the more we have these conversations, that we're the antibodies, and that spreads out. So obviously religion has been religion is, like electricity. You can use it to light the room, or you can use it to shock someone to death. And we have done a good job at the shocking more than lighting the room, in my opinion. But that we can, have these conversations in a kind, curious, compassionate way that then normalizes this notion that we need to talk about this. We need to talk about this. My dad and I used to say, we can talk about everything but politics, right? That was it. We couldn't talk about it because we fought. So mainly we just talked about how my little brother is an idiot. So that was the main thing that bonded. My little brother passed away in December. So now, like, Dad, what are we going to talk about? Let's talk about politics. Let's do it in a calm way that's respectful. And I hope that when you talk to your peers, you will take the same approach. And so we're spreading the gospel. I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong room. We're spreading the good word. But the idea of normalizing these conversations, this is happening in Israel, where there is incredible work done between Palestinians and Israelis, not about bombing each other, but about finding common ground and sharing the things that they have in common. It could be music, it could be sports, but we need to normalize that more. We're just so in each other's corners to be able to have conversations. And sometimes that requires us seeking out people. This is my favorite little thing to do, because my social media is my people from Portland and my people from Stone Mountain, Georgia. So it's like about as different as you can imagine. So I like to sort of say, hey, I've got my friend over here. Why don't we have a conversation about this? And just, do it in a kind way. And it's revelatory, because we've normalized fighting. We haven't normalized whatever the opposite of that is, finding common ground. And so I think the work that you're talking about is being that antibody to the contagion.
Okay, let's take the final question at Friendly House. Question number 10.
I'm humbled. Thank you. You used the example of direct action, slashing a nice tire or whatever.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you feel the same way, perhaps, that I do, that I've come to feel, that we've been primed by media, I blame the media, of calling that direct action terror, and calling these people, putting their lives on the line, chaining themselves to pipelines and stopping production and whatever. Or PETA, I think it started with PETA saving the animals, and they were called terrorists. And I wonder, is that really right? And
no, there's a real for language. I mean, the perfect example at the moment is anybody that supports Palestinian safety is called anti-Semitic, right? It's this language has been co-opted, and so that's a perfect example. And you just have to push back, and what that sort of means is talking about how it's not terrorism. But also, I always like to remind people that this country was founded by terrorists. The King George called the revolutionary terrorists. So one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, sort of that sort of language. But yeah, I mean, there is a battle for the meaning of words. I mean, it's very Orwellian. I had my students read 1984 last term just so they could start making connections about the power of language and how people can, rewrite the meaning of words, and then they don't mean what they meant, and you have someone who has power over what's happening because they control the language. I mean, that was Winston Smith's job at the Ministry of Truth, is rewriting the news stories. That's what's happening, right now, right before our eyes. So yeah, that and that's a struggle. I mean, we have to struggle against it. That's not terrorism, but it's not easy because I got a lot of power.
Okay, we don't have any more questions. We do have a comment on Zoom that I'm just going to read out. It's from Marsha, who thanks you and says she will look for your watching the wheels. Thank you. Let's join Marsha and thank Randall Blazak for his fantastic presentation.
No, great. Plenty of competition.